Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you back to the Dynamic Decisions podcast, where we explore the strategies that drive successful decision making in the world of business. Why? Because the best decisions come from great conversations. I'm your host, Tisha Cable, CEO of C Model Data, and today we have a growth stage operating partner who specializes in helping companies escape the operational bottlenecks that prevent scaling past product market fit. His name is Jason. He's the founder and operating partner at Redwood Ridge with over 20 years of experience scaling B2B SaaS platforms from 45 million to 130 million plus in recurring revenue. Jason works at the intersection of deep product strategy, operational efficiency, and organizational psychology. That's what I like to call it. Jason, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Tell us more.
Tisha, thank you so much. I'm honored and excited to speak with you today. I really sadly love to nerd out on this kind of stuff.
Yay.
Like you mentioned, I'm a product and operations guy with 20 plus years of building and fixing the machinery underneath companies of all shapes and sizes, 20 years plus. Don't let the gray hairs fool you. But what it's mostly meant is walking into chaos and trying to find something that I can turn into something that scales, right? So, and that's taken on a lot of shapes and sizes. And it's been interesting for me because I didn't set out for a career in product and ops. I don't know of anybody who actually did. I came up as a writer and editor. I then realized that solving problems, that was more interesting to me than writing about them. So, and I've also found that background has given me, I like to think of a somewhat unique perspective into ways of discovery and to problem solving that's been particularly rewarding for the companies I've worked with and for me as well. And that's what led me down this long, winding, crazy path. After several years of working in senior and executive leadership for some companies you've heard of, and I promise one or two I'm sure you haven't, I founded Redwood Ridge Strategies. I maybe would have given it a different name had I realized what a tongue twister it could be. But now I work with organizations trying to solve for the problems that I've seen throughout my career.
Yeah, no, this is great. And it's an area where I think that people underestimate the kinds of very specific support that business leaders actually need. And strategy is the key. And most of the time, because the strategy and the execution is so disconnected, not because the strategy in itself is poor, it just might not be the right one for the right moment and time. And then how do you even get there without knowing the problems? So I want to talk a little bit. I want to go specifically down this path with you. So you have something called founder drag, right? And founder drag is brutal precisely because it's invisible. So the founder is pulling 80-hour weeks, convinced that that's just what leadership looks like, never seeing that they've become the constraint. Take me inside a specific sort of founder that you've worked with. You know, what were some of the symptoms and how did you get them to see that they were the thing blocking the company from scaling? And if you will, explain founder drag to our audience a little bit.
So founder drag, I think many of us have had it in different parts of our lives. Maybe we haven't founded a company. Most of my work these days is with the growth stage founders. So they're usually companies between like 1 million and 10 million in revenue. So they've either bootstrapped to a certain point or they got funding, and they got that funding or they were successful because of what got them there. So what that means, being on every sales call, half fixing every bug, just being in the loop on every tiny decision that the company has to face. Now, while that happens, the consequence winds up being that the culture that they love, at the thing that they built, it starts to wobble a little bit. Decisions start to be delayed because they have to be involved in every decision. A lot of times, they're also not able to remember the last time they had a weekend. So they built something great, but the problem is the company can't grow past them. They've become the bottleneck. And my job is to get them out of their way, to kind of build the systems and the people so the business stops depending on them being in every room. Now, you asked, when do they usually come to me? I had one just happen last week. What brought them to me is this person was handling customer care emails on, it was like a Friday or Saturday night at something like 1:00 in the morning. And he sent out one of the emails with the wrong customer name on it. Now, We all make that kind of mistake. We all do silly things. But when it's something that's driving 5 or 6 figures worth of revenue and you only have so much wiggle room, you don't want to show the world that you're kind of exhausted or that
Yeah.
you don't have attention to detail, which isn't even the right diagnosis, right? It's just the
Right.
person's tired. Other times I get calls because somebody got tired of missing her son's third soccer game in a row.
Wow.
And they'll call me and they say, you know what? There are some things I know I need to be in. There are some things I know I don't. What do I do? And that's
Yeah.
that's usually that's usually the breaking point where they call me.
Wow. So when you were at Suzy, you
Uh-huh.
you took ARR from 45 million to 75 million in about 18 months. But you walked into a company stuck at a growth ceiling, right? Fragmented product org, no scalable GTM loop. Operationally, they were all jammed up. When you step into like a plateaued company like that, what's your framework for finding the real constraint? Because companies usually are going to blame pricing, product, go to market, org design all at once. They're going to blame it all together and say that's the problem. So how do you cut through that and sort of isolate which one of those things is actually holding them?
Well, it could be any of them. That's the trick, right? So what I do is kind of like when you take your car into the shop and they say they're going to do a 130 point check and you think, I didn't know my car had 130 points. Is this real? In business, it is real. And there could be so many symptoms. So Suzy was an interesting case because Suzy's a weird company in that it has a consumer side and an enterprise side. The consumer side actually feeds the enterprise side, and they didn't start them both at the same time. So one of those sides was lagging behind the other. So the customer side, the consumer side wasn't scaling as fast as the enterprise side, and the enterprise side couldn't scale without the consumer side.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the diagnostic that we made there. And it turned out there were a couple different factors, one of which was they really weren't focusing on the audience where they were going to make the most money. And then another being even though it was a somewhat mature-ish product by then, it didn't have a mature product team. The product team I inherited was a 3-person team with no product experience, no tech experience, and arguably the most experienced of the three. His last job was as a 4th-grade school teacher. So we had to build the systems and the operations to allow them to basically scale their successes and their wins and to make them to where they were getting them more.
I think one of the things that when I hear you talking through that is people don't necessarily even understand scale. So could you break down a little bit around like how do you help people understand whether they can or cannot scale?
It's such a great point because the truth is the systems that got you to a certain point, say 500,000 a year in revenue, they're just not the systems that are going to get you to 10 million in revenue. And Tisha, the way I try to look at it, and I think a lot of us who have gone up through a corporate culture, they can understand this. Think of the first time that you went from being an individual contributor to being, say, a director. Remember the first time you
Hmm.
had a direct report, right? I remember the first day that happened with me. And I sat down at my desk and I looked at all of the deliverables in front of me. And I remember thinking, I remember it like it happened yesterday. I remember thinking, how on earth am I going to do all of this? And then I had this moment of clarity entirely by accident where I thought, no, you idiot. You're not the one who has to do it. You're the one who has to lead the people into doing it. You have to show them how to do it and support them as they do it. It's really no different. When you get a company founded, you probably got it financed, you probably got the investment, or you grew to a certain stage because it was a great idea. And you had a really good solution or a practical solution that had some kind of product market fit, and the product has a future. And that's great. But the skills that got you to that point as a founder are not the same skills that are going to get you to the next level. You can't be on every call. You can't be in every triage session. You need to go back to being what got you there in the first place, the skills, the vision. And you need to basically enable people on your team who may actually be better at some of those things than you are, perish the thought. You need to empower them and enable them to make decisions that in a lot of times are potentially better than the ones you would have made.
So good. Okay. So let me ask you about another scaling-ish kind of question. Scaling-ish is what I'll call it.
Okay.
So you, when you were at Suzy, you had this LLM automation that ended up saving like $1.5 million a year in support overhead, and you lifted their NPS 20%, having post-release defects. So that's really technology eliminating burden, not just slashing the cost. But we know that automation can quietly strip out that human touch that sometimes holds relationships together. So when you're deciding what to automate, where's the line between automation that strengthens the customer experience and automation that's just extracting margin at the expense of value?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and I see a lot of companies really struggling with this today. Not only the ones I work with, but even the ones that we hear about on the news, laying people off. I think you need to take a step back and evaluate where the true value is in that human to human point and where some of that stuff can be replicated. Now, at Suzy, what we did is we used an LLM-based system to handle tier one customer support. Now, for us, tier one customer support was, where's my gift card? Or
Right.
I forgot how to reset my password. How do I do it? That kind of stuff can be automated really easily. And if you're training it on your existing model and your existing content, and you have a human in the loop regularly to validate and verify that the responses aren't going out of whack, that's a good place to make a savings. And my favorite part about that story, though, one thing you didn't mention, you mentioned that the human cost of personalization. That's a situation there where there could have also been a human cost to jobs. And I'm always sensitive to that. I grew up in a working class family, and it's not always easy to keep the job you have. What we were able to do at Suzy, though, is take people who were working in these lower level for the company, tier one customer support jobs, and train them to do higher value jobs for the customer, but also higher growth jobs for their career. So Suzy was a market research company. They still is. I'm not there, but they
Yeah,
still
yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And they do needed somebody to moderate focus groups, or somebody to come maybe become a product manager. We brought somebody on our team as a product manager. So if you play your cards right, it can improve the customer experience, improve finances. It made it to where we didn't have to ramp up with seasonal employment for the holidays, and you may also be helping build some careers along the line if you play your cards right.
So hiring is one area where you can modify. Here's another one. So pricing is where a lot of companies leave money on the table. They are either under reading willingness to pay or building in different kinds of friction that ends up costing them deals. Can you walk me through your methodology? How do you actually gather willingness to pay data, structure those experiments, and then make the internal case to move off of a model that's working but leave value on the floor?
It's a big question in the industry today because the influx of AI, quickly developed AI-based SaaS solutions, have made it to where a lot of the SaaS pricing models, like the per seat pricing models, they're kind of out of whack right now, and you're seeing more of an appetite to pay for results as opposed to consumption, which makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
So how I've always done it, and I think it's really important when you're in the product development room, or you're in, whether it's the corporate offices or your personal private office where the Zoom call is, it's really easy to become detached from how you think the product is being used and how the product actually is being used.
Oof.
So really, it's like a lot of other things where you just need to have the best information you can get. You need to
Yeah.
understand the usage patterns, how it's being used. It may not be being used the way you intended. And from that, once you know those usage patterns and you do customer interviews to better understand what the desires are, what does the product not do that they want it to do, you can then build your pricing philosophies based on that. And maybe if you're in an enterprise environment, like some of my prior engagements were, a per seat model, the classic per seat SaaS model still makes sense. But
Mhm.
sometimes if you're selling to different kinds of audiences, maybe you need to rely more on a results based, output based model.
Mm.
And trust me, we're all figuring this out right now. You've heard the stories about people who were shocked when they received a $74,000 invoice out of nowhere from Anthropic. Well, it didn't come out of nowhere. You just didn't know where those tokens were being spent.
That's right.
So we're all trying to evaluate how best to monitor that right now. I think putting yourself in the customer's shoes to understand where the customer sees the value and how the customer is using the software, or whatever the solution is, that's what really drives how you can then develop the pricing.
So
Okay.
most SaaS is sales led, where, friction is generally tolerated because a rep is there and they justify the value. PLG, however, product led growth, forces you to really obsess over every single step of the funnel. So, what actually changes at the product level and the culture level when you shift a company from sales led to product led? And what kind of excites you the most about product led as a growth vector?
It's funny because I've worked in SaaS environments where we technically were sales led, but we did operate with a product led growth type mindset.
Interesting.
And the reason for that mostly was we found it was more cost effective to try to get our existing customer base to expand their usage of the product than it was to try to find new customers or to try to get the customer on the phone with the sales rep so the sales rep could pitch it. We would instead want to show them how it was valuable. So we would launch new features that in Suzy's case would increase the customer's use of credit. So they would want to buy more credits. That was a SaaS based model. So they would then want to basically amp up their allocation for the month and for the year. Where I do think it really changes though is with sales led, if you have a good enough sales team, you have the benefit of that personal relationship between the salesperson and
Mhm.
the buyer.
Yeah.
With PLG, you don't have that. It's really just the product in a room with the user.
Yeah.
And that, think of all the times you go on social media and the people who you're interacting with on social media aren't really people to you. They're just avatars. So you can say and type whatever you want with no consequence. A product is a faceless thing. So
Mhm.
end users can sometimes assume the worst out of the intentions of the product, which doesn't have any feelings at all. But sometimes the good intentions of the product developers don't necessarily translate the way you want them to. So
For
I
sure.
find you have to be a little bit more obvious in the value proposition of the features that you're using to drive PLG.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that it's one of the areas where you have to realize like people gone people, and so you really have to dig into the people part of it. I think that's where some of the unique pieces. A lot of consultants they quietly engineer their own job security, but your whole model with Redwood Ridge is actually the opposite, right? You
Yeah.
hand off the playbooks, the data loops, the decision matrices and you leave teams able to self-correct without you. So when you're building that operating structure, how do you decide what gets documented, what gets systematized, what gets automated? Where's the real line between sustainable infrastructure and a consultant dependent relationship?
Mm. It's a really easy question for me because I don't focus as much on the ongoing. I don't need an engagement to be 6 months or 9 months or a year. If it is, that's great. If somebody wants to bring me in to not only help them build the systems, but then operate the systems, if I have the capacity, I will happily join as a fractional.
Hmm.
But what I am looking for is for them to succeed. The thing where I might be wired just a little bit differently, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing in life. I don't know if it's a good thing as a consultant. I genuinely care about the people I'm talking to and working with. I bet everybody tells you that. I'm not sure if everybody tells you that they are probably really bad salespeople. I think I'm a pretty bad salesperson. I was on 2 calls this week with engagements that boy, I hope they go somewhere, but one of the engagements, we spent half the time talking about how her child is a product startup genius at age 15. I hope I get to work with her and her company, but I care more about how her kid is doing
Yeah.
because I'm just genuinely curious about people. I want to give my clients value for their money. I want to leave them in a better spot than they were when they brought me in. I want to have it to where there's the systems that I help them build. I work with them to diagnose the problems and then I build out these systems. I'll train their people if that's part of the engagement.
Hmm.
If I walk away after 3 months or 4 months and that's the end of the engagement, if they're better for it and they're happy with what they spent, that's enough for me. I'll get
Yeah.
another client. They'll refer me to another client.
Yeah.
But I don't want to create this forced codependency, this quicksand trap or anything. I have to live with myself at the end of the day. That just makes me feel icky.
Yeah. That's good. And I understand it 100%. I always tell people, if I can leave you and you can continue to operate as if I was there, like when I came and fixed whatever problem and I really solved it, and now you're better for that. That's a better legacy for me than if you gotta have me, right? Because and
Right.
I'm the only one. Like that means that I didn't do as fantastic of a job as I would have liked to
Yeah.
have done.
I don't want to force them into an engage. I didn't do this to engineer my own job description. I know that's what a career coach would tell me I should be doing.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
I could probably make more money than I do today doing that. But I don't like that. It's the people who are always the most memorable for me. Those are the
Sure.
experiences I remember throughout my career, not just as a consultant. When I was at
Yeah.
Shutterfly, for instance,
Yes.
and I worked on a project that improved, optimized a particular process on the production floor. Right. So, they print the photo books, they pack the photo books, they ship the photo books off. Most of the stuff we did was working on the generation of them, the capture of the information, the website, that sort of stuff. But this actually worked on the floor. I did this thing that brought in, I don't know, $1.5 million over a holiday season. It's a good chunk, but Shutterfly makes a lot of their money over the holiday season. Didn't disrupt operations at all, allowed them to be more efficient. We then had our company all hands. At the time, Shutterfly's production facility was in Tempe, Arizona, and the headquarters was in Redwood City, California. They used to fly people up every now and then to the Fox Theater in Redwood City. And they brought in like 3 people from the production team. The people packing the boxes, Tisha, they never got any recognition at all. They brought them in, brought them up on stage, gave them rewards, and they got a standing ovation in front of all of us tech dweebs in the audience who were like, oh, so happy for them. I remember that day like it was yesterday.
That's
I,
so
I don't
important.
remember a lot of the details about the actual solution, but I remember the way they felt when that happened. It was such a small moment in the product life of Shutterfly. It was a big moment in their lives. That carries with me year after year.
So thank you so much for that. Here, let's go through. It's my favorite part. I do a little persona assessment. So I'm going to ask you these 4 different questions
Okay.
that really represent different decision making styles, different decision making
Okay.
approaches. And after each one, you're going to tell me if how I'm asking the question actually resonates with how you approach decisions. And you'll have a scale from 0 to 100%. Now, you only get 100% across all 4, and I
Okay.
won't give them all to you up front. You'll get them one at a time. Okay? Because that makes it fun for me. So here we go. The first one is called the feeler. It's a values driven leader. So this persona prioritizes alignment with core values and mission, often weighing the human impact and cultural fit of decisions alongside its business metrics. So when I'm making an operating decision that reshapes how a company functions, whether I'm automating support, redesigning the sales motion, or sunsetting product that teams have poured themselves into, I ask myself, beyond the revenue and the efficiency gains, what does this do to the people here? When I automate support with LLMs, am I cutting jobs or freeing people from the repetitive work to do something more meaningful? When I consolidate products, what happens to the teams whose identity is tied to what I'm sunsetting? When I pull a founder out of daily triage, am I genuinely giving them higher leverage work or just relocating their stress? I need to know that the changes I make strengthen the culture and create better working conditions, not just move the metrics. So, Jason, how much does that approach to decisions by asking yourself these value based questions resonate?
My goodness, am I going to blow my entire allocation so quickly? On that one, it is a critical part of the way I work. I am going to say, I'm not going to hedge. I'm going to say 60.
Okay, 60%. Hold on to that number, okay? Because that means you got 40% left. Here we go. The next one, right. The next one is called the planner. It's a strategic visionary. So this persona focuses on long-term implications and future-proofing decisions, always thinking several moves ahead and considering multiple scenarios. So when I'm structuring a company for growth, building a product-led growth engine, redesigning pricing, or standing up a new org framework, I ask myself, what are the second and third order effects across multiple futures? If I'm going to move company from sales led to product led and it wins for 24 months, but then the market swings back toward high touch, have I built something flexible enough to adapt? If I automate support on today's LLM capabilities, but that edge gets commoditized in 2 years, does that advantage compound or evaporate? If I remove the founder as the bottleneck, am I building genuinely independent capability or just optimizing for this particular phase? I need today's decisions to create long-term flexibility and resilience, not just solve the immediate scaling problem that's in front of me right now. Okay. How much does that forward thinking scenario planning approach to questioning actually resonate with how you make decisions?
I think for me, it's probably about 15.
Okay. Okay. All right, 15%. So you got 60% feeler,
Yes. I've got 25 to go, right?
25 to go. Here we go. The next one is called the counter. It's the challenger of assumptions. So this persona naturally questions conventional wisdom and looks for contrarian opportunities, often finding success by zigging when others zag. So when I look at how most growth stage SaaS companies run, they're all following the same playbook. Optimize acquisition costs, build sales heavy teams, compete on feature velocity, and accept that founders will be stretched thin because that's just what founders do. I keep questioning all of it. I ask myself whether the bottleneck is really features or whether it's how teams are organized, whether pricing matters far more than people admit, whether eliminating friction beats adding capability. So much of why companies stall, I think, is that they're running a playbook built for the last generation of SaaS winners that doesn't fit today's dynamics. Which of those inherited assumptions about how a SaaS company should be organized and operate am I willing to challenge to get a genuinely different outcome? So, Jason, how much does that assumption, challenging, contrarian style of questioning resonate with your process?
Yeah, it is really important. Is it as important as the last one?
Whoa.
See now, I've fallen into your trap. I'm not. You know what? I'm going to say 10 on that one. I know it's between 10 and 15. I'm going to say 10.
Okay. All right. There it is. 10% counter.
And now we
All
find
right.
out where does the rest of it go? Where does the rest of it go, Tisha?
Where does it go? Let's see. It's called the data driver. It's an evidence-based decision maker. So this persona relies heavily on metrics, analytics, and concrete evidence to validate decisions, preferring proof over intuition. So given how I operate, I ask myself, what's the data and the experiment behind this before I commit to a major call on product pricing or org structure? When I diagnose a bottleneck, I'm looking at leading indicators, engineering delivery velocity, feature to revenue ratios, pricing experiment conversion rates that tell me whether a change is actually working rather than just feeling productive. Before I shift a company from sales led to product led, what experiments justify it instead of intuition about market trends? When I design automation, what analysis tells me which areas benefit from LLMs and which still need a human? But I also ask myself, what matters here that won't sit still long enough to measure? How do I tell whether a culture change is real or just surface level compliance? What signals from the team, from a founder's behavior patterns, from customer conversations tell me a transformation is sticking? Some of the outcomes that I care about most, whether teams feel genuinely empowered, whether a founder can think strategically again, whether the organization becomes truly independent of me, they can't be cleanly quantified. So how do I stay rigorous on the metrics while honoring the things that don't fit on the dashboard? So, Jason, how much does that data-driven, evidence-focused approach to questioning resonate with you and your strategic decision making?
I actually think it worked out pretty well. So I think we had 15 left. It's probably about that. Now, I'm probably being a little bit fuzzy on how we define data. As someone who's hired a ton of product managers, there's almost a playbook that an applicant comes in with where you say, how do you like to make decisions? They all go, I like to make data-driven decisions. Yes, we all like to make data-driven decisions. Nobody has the data. So what do you do then?
Yeah.
Because that's the dirty secret. Google, Meta,
Come
nobody
on,
has the
dirty
data.
secret. Come on, dirty secrets. Fill it out.
Yeah, nobody has the data. Everybody wants the data. So what do you
Yes.
do when you don't have the data? And one of the things you do is you try to generate some of the data that might help you
Yes.
figure out how to measure it afterwards. That's also data driven. So I think it probably worked out. Going into a decision, though, I probably lean a little bit less on that, just knowing that the data's just not always there.
Yeah. Really good. All right. Share with our listeners where they can learn more about your work at Redwood Ridge and where they can follow your thinking.
Well, fantastic. So feel free to come to the website at redwoodridge.net. Another place where you can find me is I write a newsletter. I'm a former writer. You could take that out of me, but you can't, go to, it's called The Next Gear. It's me and 10,000 of my closest founder friends as I'm writing about what's happening in the ecosystem. You can see that at nextgear.news. That's a weekly free newsletter. You can also find me by searching on either Jason Jackson or Redwood Ridge on LinkedIn. And I write there a lot too, because I just write a lot because that's what we old writers do.
I love it. And for our listeners who are interested in growth stage strategy and operating, go do exactly what he just said. Go follow him, get that newsletter, do those things. And thank you for tuning in. Remember, the best decisions come from great conversations. If you enjoyed this episode, we want you to subscribe, rate, and share it with your network. And let's keep the conversation going on social media using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. And until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading with purpose.